Thank you, Gary, and welcome everybody. Hopefully everybody here has at least been to the Apex forum at least once. It's an excellent resource to get help for various issues you may run into while using Apex. From time to time, the Apex development team will also run polls on that forum just to really get the pulse of the community. And this is the most recent question they asked in that poll. You know, what's your favorite feature of Apex 4.0? There were a lot to choose from. Here are the results of that poll. These are in no particular order, and they are actually updated. They're up to date as of yesterday. It's not hard to see what's winning here. Myself, I voted for plugins. I absolutely love the new plugin architecture, but plugins didn't even get half the votes that dynamic actions have received. They're far and above everything else. And that got me to thinking, why? Why is it that dynamic actions are doing so well? And I started to think back to when I first started to use this kind of technology. And then it dawned on me. It's because they're cool. Dynamic actions are so cool. Well, that is when they're done appropriately. I'll talk more about the use restraint later. But this kind of technology really is cool. We can make our applications come to life, and in the process make the experience for the end user better than it would have otherwise been. Now, some people here are actually starting with Apex 4.0, where dynamic actions are making this kind of thing declarative. They know nothing about some of the hardships we underwent with previous versions, and no, I'm not bitter about that, not at all. So what are we doing here today? Well, we're going to make some changes to a very popular application, the sample application. Hopefully everybody here is familiar with that one. If not, it's really easy to install in your workspace, so you can repeat what we do here another time. For those of you attending today to really escape work, my apologies to you, but that's exactly what we'll be doing here. We're going to review some specifications and implement them using dynamic actions. Along the way, we'll run into some limitations of dynamic actions, and we'll learn to bridge the gap between what we can do and what we want to do, utilizing our knowledge of these related technologies. Let's get started. First specification. The application should disable the alternate phone field until the phone number field is filled in. What are they asking for here? Let's take a look. I'm now in my workspace, and I have a copy of the sample application right here. I've actually just created that. It's a fresh copy. I've not made any changes to it. We'll go ahead and run it. Here we are, standard sample app. And they said alternate phone field must be talking about customers, right? We'll drill into the customer form. Here we are, phone number and alternate phone number. So what are they asking for? Basically, if the phone number field is cleared out, they don't want this field, the alternate phone field, to be accessible, which as you can see it is currently. They're basically saying, you know, the alternate phone field should only be populated once the phone number field has been populated, which makes sense, simple enough. So how would we go about implementing something like this using dynamic actions? You need to ask yourself a series of questions, starting with the driver. What is the driver in this case? If you're thinking the phone number field, you'd be correct. And more specifically, the driver would be if the phone number field is null or not null, depending on how you look at it. Once you've answered that question, you have your when. In this case, when the phone number field is not null. Next question. What should happen if that's true? Well, in this case, the phone number field is not null. That means it has a value, so we want to enable the alternate phone number field. Simple enough. And of course, then the follow-up question to that would be, what would happen if that is false? Well, it'd be the exact opposite, right? We would then want to disable the alternate phone field. Let's take a look at how we could do this with dynamic actions. So I'm going to go to Edit the Page. And I'm using the new tree view. Hopefully everyone here has begun doing the same. Very powerful view. We have two ways to start the dynamic action. We can go right to the driver, which we've decided is the phone number field as opposed to the alternate phone field. If we right-click, we can come down to Create Dynamic Action here. And another way to do this would be to go to the bottom of the tree where you'll see Dynamic Actions here. We can right-click that and create here as well. The difference between the two is minimal. Basically, if we start with the driver, it will fill in a few fields for us. So it's worth doing that if possible. So we'll go to Create the Dynamic Action. And immediately, we run into a fork in the road. You have to make a decision here, standard or advanced. Most people are a little bit worried about advanced. What is that? What can it do that I don't know about? Well, the truth is that both standard and advanced are the same. It's just that when you choose standard, some basic decisions are made for you, and a lot of the options you have available are limited. Standard works when the when we talked about before is change. So if you remember back, actually let me take you there, we said when the phone number field is not null. In this case, that when is change, so standard works. Standard also means that the actions you can do must either be hide and show or enable and disable. And again, if we look at our actions, they are enable and disable. So we can use standard here. So we'll select that. We need to give it a name. This is the phone number field is populated. I recommend that you choose a name based on your driver. Okay, we're now at the when. And we've thought this through, so this shouldn't be terribly hard. What did we say? When the phone number field, already selected, is not null. We can select that here. So our when is good. We'll go next. And now we're deciding what actions we want to take. Again, the standard just work with the basics, show and hide, enable, disable. So when it's not null, in other words, the phone number field has a value, then we want to enable the alternate phone number field. Now, that also means we want to disable it if that's not true, or create the opposite false action, which is checked for us automatically, so we're good to go. We'll click Next to continue. And here we have to select which item we want to enable or disable. And of course, that's the alternate phone, or phone number 2. We'll click Create. And once we're done, you can scroll down in the tree view, drill into your item. You'll see your dynamic action here. And go even further and see your true and false actions here. You'll see the dynamic action at the bottom as well. Let's run the page and see if it's working. Okay, currently the phone number field is populated. As we would expect, I can easily get into the alternate phone field. But if I take this value and clear it out, it's now disabled. I can't get into it. So it is in fact working. But what actually happened here? And it's kind of hard to tell just by looking, right? So let's take a look using some tools. Bring this into view. And I'm actually going to populate this so I can get into the alternate phone field. I'm going to right-click. I'll go to Inspect the Element. And let's see here. So here's the input. We see it has several attributes. One of those is class. Notice that class does not have a value. And also notice that you do not see an attribute of disabled. Okay, so this is what you get for the input when it is enabled. In other words, I can type in it. Okay, but let me clear this out. And now it's disabled. So what happened here? Let's take a look. We'll go to inspect the element next to it. Since this one is disabled, I can't drill into it right now. So I'll go next to it, and then we'll just come down a little bit. Here we are. So notice now it has a class. It's Apex disabled. And additionally, all the way to the right here, we see a disabled attribute. So that's what happened. It added a class and an additional disabled attribute. Okay, so what do these do? Well, the class is added so that you really know it's disabled. If you look to the top here, while I remove this class, you'll see the change. So it made the background a little bit darker, a little bit more obvious that that particular element was not usable. Okay, and of course, the disabled attribute here, I remove that, we're then able to get in and modify the field. So that's what the dynamic action did, and we didn't have to write a single line of code to do it. But no, I'm not bitter about that. This is good. A moment ago, you saw me using a tool to really see what's going on behind the scenes. I recommend everybody use those kinds of tools, the tools that help you do your job. That starts with choosing the right browser. Firefox, in my honest opinion, is still the best browser for development. That doesn't mean you won't have to at least test an Internet Explorer, as most of your users will use that particular browser. But Firefox is more powerful at this point. IE 9 is looking really promising, but we'll have to wait to see when it's released. Firebug is the plugin in Firefox you saw me use a moment ago. In fact, I demonstrated real-time inspection and modification. You saw me modify the DOM. In addition to that ability, we also have a command line tool. I'll demo that here in just a moment. And we get into really advanced debugging capabilities that simply don't exist in most browsers. I'm not going to demo those here today, but believe me, they exist and they're very powerful. Dynamic actions have some basic debug abilities that were built in. And they utilize the console for that to work. Now, console is something that does not even exist in IE, at least not yet, but it does exist in Firefox, and we're able to see it using Firebug. Let me show you the command line tool. What I'll do is select the console tab here, Firebug, and I'll come over here. This is the command line tool. And I can basically type in any JavaScript here. And I can then click on Run, or I can just hit Control-Enter. And we actually see that live. So this is executing JavaScript as though it were in the web page. Okay. Over here in the console, we can see what was run. And I can also output to the console. It's a little bit like using DBMS output.putline, except it's console.log. I'll click Run this time. We can see what ran, and we can see the information here in the console. So these are just a couple of the tools that we have available to us when using a browser like Firefox and Firebug. I recommend you move to these as soon as possible. What else can we do to bridge the gap between what we want to do and what we see out of the box? We can learn a little bit more about HTML and the DOM. Now, most people know at least a little bit about HTML, but are perhaps a little worried about the DOM. It's not that bad. The DOM is just short for Document Object Model, and simply put, it's the way that your browser sees a web page. Basically, it's a collection of elements, and these elements have methods. They're not just static text like we would see in an HTML document. These methods allow us to do various things, like disable them, as you just saw. We can also traverse the hierarchical relationship amongst various elements with these methods. And when we combine that with all of the events that have been added to the DOM, well, then we can really do what we want to do in our applications. We use the events that fire all the time to call the various methods and interact with the application. So there's an analogy here. They're a bit like triggers in a database. What I've done is created a little demo here of some of the events that occur in a browser. Let me clear this out. Refresh. So what we're going to do, basic interaction, I'm going to take the mouse and I'm going to click inside the first name field. I'll type a little text and then hit Tab to go to the next field, a fairly common interaction. What I've done, I've set up some JavaScript, basically using this technique here to log various events that occur so that you can see them as that happens. Let's take a look. I hover over, click, type, Tab, and move away, and we're done. Now, what exactly happened? Mouse over fired, mouse move fired, mouse down then fired. Focus, mouse up, on and on and on. 10 plus events fired in that simple interaction. The truth of the matter is that a lot more events fired. I just set this up to record one occurrence of each event, so 10 plus distinct events. But every pixel you move your mouse is another event. So you know when you're waiting for a browser to load another page and you start to do one of these with your mouse? Well, you're not helping, because that's just firing more events that your browser has to contend with. Specification number 2. The application should hide the list price and product image if the product available is no. What are they talking about? Well, I see product mentioned a lot, so it must have to do with that. Let's move over to products. And we'll drill down on any product here. Okay, so here's product available, and they're saying that when this is no, we should hide the list price and product image details. And we see these items here, but if you look to the right, you'll also notice that there's a product image region that we'll also need to take care of and hide as well. So let's go through that thought process again. What is the driver? When the product available equals no, actually it's N behind the scenes, so product available equals N. And what should happen if that's true? Well, if that equals N, then we need to hide the list price and product image. In this case, we're hiding items as well as a region. And of course, what should happen if that's false? The exact opposite. So we'll then show those items and the region. Let's see if we can implement this using dynamic actions. So again, I'll go to edit the page. And we need to find the driver. We decided that the driver was product available, so I'll go there, go to create a dynamic action. And here we are with that fork in the road again, standard or advanced. Well, we're still in the realm of standard because the when is a change. If it changes to yes or no or anything else. And the true and false, it's hide and show. So remember, standard works with the when equals change, and the actions have to be hide, show, enable, or disable. We can still use standard, so let's do that. A name based on the driver. Okay, so if product available is equal to, and in this case, simple enough, N, what do we want to have happen? Let's set up the true and false actions. In this case, if product available equals N, then we want to hide some things. Of course, we'll enable the opposite false action automatically. And then we have to choose what we want to hide and show. Now, we can select from a number of different things. The problem is that we want to do two of these, items and a region. We can't do them both now, so we'll have to tackle them one at a time. But the framework is set up to allow you to do that. So let's start with items. I want to hide the list price and the product image. Now, this item here, P6 image, does need to be hidden as well, but it's inside of the other region I want to hide, so I'm not going to worry about that one. We'll go ahead and create the dynamic action. We'll scroll down and take a look at the result. So here we are, one dynamic action with two actions here, one hide, one show. Now what we need to do is add an additional action for each. I'll start with true. We'll go to create. And we can use these shortcuts here. I basically, if the product equals no, then I want to hide. In this case, what are we hiding? We've already hidden the items, so we just need to hide the region. Which region? The product image region. So we'll create that. Now, unfortunately, unlike when we were in the create mode, this did not create the opposite false action for us. So I had to do that. We'll do that here. And we're doing a show. We're saying product available must equal yes, so we'll show something. What are we going to show? A region. Which region? The product image region. So we'll create that. And I think we're good. Let's go ahead and give it a test. Okay, so we'll switch product available to no. And it worked, right? Region's gone. Items are, well, the items are almost gone. This download link here got left behind. So I guess we've hit a limitation of dynamic actions and have to go back to writing our code manually, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. We have to use our tools to figure out what went wrong and then see what we can do about it. So let's take a look. We'll inspect this download link so we can get an idea. Oh, okay, so let me bring this into view here. So here's our link. You can see it highlighted up above. And we can see that the input was in fact hidden, but the link was not. Now, wouldn't it have been nice if we could have traversed up a little bit to the table row here and hidden everything in that row? Well, if we combine what we can see here along with the fact that that's a built-in feature of the framework, then we can do that. Let's take a look. So if you remember, the first action is the one that's working with my items. I'll drill into that. And a simple flip of the switch here, hide all items on the same line. Yes. And of course, we need to make the same change with the false action. Apply that. Run the page. Test it again. Ah, now it's working as we would have expected. Excellent. Next, specification. The application should allow users to filter the orders report by a new product filter. Now, I'm not going to walk us through the basic thinking anymore. We should just keep that in mind when you're developing these in the future. The when here is product changes. And what do we want to do when that happens? We want to refresh the orders report. This is one of those cases where basic dynamic actions will not work. So let's take a look at exactly what it is they're asking for. This is obviously has to do with orders and a product filter, right? So let's see. We'll move over to orders and drill down on one. Actually, I'm sorry, it was that report we wanted to work with. Okay, so this is an interactive report. These are incredibly powerful reports, allow us to do filters and such out of the box. But what were they asking for? They essentially want to be able to filter this report so that they can see the orders that contain certain items. Now, we have an order items count here, but there's no way for me to filter this report as it is to maybe find out which orders contain the belt or women's shoes, for example. So that's what they're asking for. It sounds like a reasonable request, and we'll have to add an item to this page to do that. So let's get started. We'll go to create a page item, and we're going to use a pop-up list of values because, of course, the number of items or number of items one can purchase will eventually become very large. Pop-up list of values is perfectly suited for that. We'll name it product ID. And fortunately, there is a built-in list of values we can use in the sample app for products. We'll create that item and run the page to give you an idea of what we have thus far. Here's our item, kind of at the bottom, and it just shows us various items one can order. All right, what we need to do is move this up to the top. I want to see it up here, and in addition, I also want to make sure that this item is being taken into account with regards to the report query. So let's make some adjustments here. All right, so the first thing we'll change is the display point. This particular display point will put the items above the region content. I'm also going to apply a template. This actually has to do with a bug that will be fixed in the next version of Apex. With your IRs, you should apply a template. Just keep that in mind. And here's the current query. Pretty basic. We're going to go ahead and add our own. Here's the query I want to add. It basically has a where clause here with a couple of predicates that take into account the product ID item we just added. So I'll copy this out, and we'll paste it in and save our changes. Okay, we'll run the page, and now it's looking a little better. We select an item, and nothing happens. Well, you know, select lists have a unique ability. You can configure a select list so that when it changes, the page is submitted, right? But we don't have that ability with the pop-up list of values. So can we get around that with dynamic actions? Let's take a look. Driver in this case would be the product ID we just added. And we're going to do advanced now, because what do I want to do? I want to submit the page. And that's not an action that the standard can do. So let's go with our first advanced dynamic action here. So the name, product changed. And the change event is right. That's good. The item and the ID is right. But what do we want to have happen? Well, we haven't really seen all these actions before, but here they are. These are all the actions you have available to you. We can clear things. We've seen disable, enable, and hide and show before, but we also have refresh, focus, set value. We can execute code, confirmations and alerts, and more. The one I want to do is to submit the page. That's at the bottom down here under miscellaneous. I do not want to do this on load, so I'll leave that off. We'll click next. and we'll create it. All right, let's see if it's working for us now. What orders contain a bag? Ah, these orders. And which orders have, say, ladies' shoes? These orders. Excellent. So we're done. Sure, we could leave it at this, but it's not as sexy as what a lot of people want these days in web apps. Basically, we're refreshing the entire page just to refresh that region. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just refresh that region? Maybe we can do that with dynamic actions. Let's take a look. So if we look in the item and drill down to the true action here, submit page, I'm going to change this just a little bit. Rather than submit the page, let's have it call refresh. What do we want to refresh? A region. Which region? The orders region. Apply that change. Run the page. And we'll go from ladies' shoes back to a bag. And, well, it's interesting. I saw the little indicator here say that the report was refreshing, but the report didn't refresh. Why is that? Well, the fact of the matter is that because the entire page wasn't submitted, the value of this particular item was not bound in a session state. So when the report refreshed, it was working off the previous item that was there. So this is a problem. Is there a clever workaround for it? Let's take a look. You'll notice inside this true action that we have a number of attributes, none of which really have anything to do with submitting the item. So we can't do it with this particular action. So I need to add a new action. And I'm trying to think of one that will allow us to submit items. We'll add a new true action here. And let's see, set focus, set value. Set value is a very powerful option. We'll come back to that a little later. Let me see, PL SQL. Here's what I need. Page items to submit. Okay. I want to submit the product ID. As for the PL SQL code, well, I don't really need that. So I'll just put in null. Now when I create this, let me take you back to the tree. You'll notice a rather obvious problem. Here are the true actions. Refresh the report, and then just imagine this is submitting the item. We need to reverse the order. So using the tree view, I'll drag that up. Now it'll bind the item in its session state, then refresh the report. Let's try that. So we'll go, say, to a belt. This isn't quite working. Let's try one more. Seem to have missed something here. Let me make sure that the orders has a template. That all looks right. And this also looks correct. I'm a little confused as to why this isn't working. can see here in the post that product ID is being sent out, and it's setting the value accordingly. But for some reason, it's not binding correctly. I'm actually not 100% sure as to what I'm doing wrong. But it is changing the value before it refreshes the report. Let me just make sure it's refreshing the correct report. And it is. Well, I'm a little confused, but I don't want to spend any more time on this. My apologies. Typically, this should work just fine.
Can I ask you a quick question, Dan, from one of
Sure, of course. Absolutely.
Can we have a brief reason why the template needs to be added to the IR?
Essentially, if you don't add the template, then there's some attributes that will be missing that need to be there. Basically, it's the attributes that identify the container for the IR. Without those identifiers, the event model simply doesn't work.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Yep. It's very interesting.
This is going to bug you now, huh?
Yes, indeed. Moving right along. Okay, so another recommendation language that I'd like you to learn is JavaScript. Basically, JavaScript is not as bad as it used to be. It's also far more powerful than it once was. To start with, the first lesson people need to know is that JavaScript is not Java. It's not nearly as complex as you'll find with Java. It's simply a client-side browser scripting language. jQuery, as well as jQuery UI, are two JavaScript libraries that have been integrated with Apex 4.0 and make working with JavaScript far easier than it's ever been before. So when you get started in JavaScript, just get started with jQuery, and you'll find that it's much easier than you might have thought it would be. Dynamic actions are generated using, or actually generate JavaScript for you. So really, dynamic actions are still based in JavaScript. So your knowledge here will pay off in the long run. Learn CSS.
Hey, Dan,
I promise.
Can I just share
Sure.
one? Somebody just chimed in on the issue before and had said maybe the problem is in the IR report.
It's certainly possible. It was working before, though, with the submit. So I know that it's working with that particular item.
Okay.
It's actually the report refresh for some reason doesn't seem to be working. Maybe I'll take a quick look again toward the end here.
Okay. Thank you.
So learn CSS. Now, I know I'm asking you to learn a lot of languages today, but I'm not saying that you have to be a guru in any of them. If you were to travel to another country, say Spain, wouldn't you want to learn a couple of words before you went, like food and bathroom? They can take you a long way. And the same is true learning a little bit about each of these technologies. They can take you a long way. So cascading style sheets, what does that mean? Well, basically, cascading style sheets are all about the look and feel of various elements in your web page. And the cascading part has to do with the fact that the rules can be defined at different places. And basically, the rule closest to the element almost always wins. Now, these rules use selectors to apply various style rules, such as, background color and border and things like that. And CSS selectors are actually a lot like the jQuery selectors. In fact, jQuery based their selectors off of CSS selectors for the most part. What does that mean? Your knowledge in one technology translates to another. So you see a number of selectors here. You can select by input, you can select by ID, class, pseudo class, and so on. So knowledge in one transfers to the other. Let's take a look at another specification. The application should have a button that allows users to increase a customer's credit limit. Use a built-in function. Okay, so when a button is clicked, we basically want to set the value of the credit limit via a function. This is another case where a basic dynamic action simply won't work. Let's take a look. We're talking about credit limit. Must have to do with customers. Drill in on one. And here's credit limit. So basically what they're saying is when they click a button, maybe we'll put it right here, they want the credit limit to change to the max available for this particular customer. Easy enough. What do we need to implement this? Well, first we'll need to put in the button. Add the code for that here. So we've learned HTML, right? And we know this is just a basic input button. I've given it an ID to identify it and a value which we see. Now most people add buttons in Apex just by going to the standard create button. In this case, I find this to be a little bit easier. We're going to go into the credit limit. And I'll come down to post element text, and we'll put this in here. Apply the change. Run the page. Simple enough, we have our button. Now we just have to make it do something. Okay, so once again, the driver was when we click this, the true action, we set this to the max value using a built-in PL/SQL function. All right, let's go ahead and make that happen. Now, I've actually created a function. A couple years back, I analyzed the credit industry and followed some popular trends, and this is what I came up with to calculate the maximum credit limit for a customer. You pass in the ID of a customer. We use that to look up their current credit limit. Then we take their current credit limit, we multiply it by a random value, and then we multiply that for 100 just for fun. I think this is accurate, a couple years back. So here's our max credit limit function. This is defined in our schema. So I want to call that, and I want to use it to set the credit limit here. So the button, however, is the driver. Previously, I was right-clicking on various things here, and then selecting Create Dynamic Action. But credit limit is not the driver. So we need to come down to the bottom and create it from here. Standard or advanced, of course, in this case, we're going to go with advanced. We'll say the name is increase, credit was clicked. And the event. The event in this case is not change, but click. And it's not an item, really. It's not a region either. DOM object, well, I want to be more specific than that. jQuery selector is the only other option. So if we use the knowledge of CSS and jQuery we've gained, we can put in a selector that keys off of the ID that we gave to the button. If we look back, the button had max limit for the ID. And this selector will key off that. So when this button is clicked, what do we want to do? Well, again, we have a number of actions available to us under the advanced dynamic actions. The one I want to show you now is set value. So a number of different ways we can set the value, one of which happens to be a PL/SQL function body. And I've typed that out here. We're basically using return because it is the body of a function rather than an expression, and calling that function, passing in the customer ID. Click Next. And now we have to specify what item's value we're updating. So again, credit limit wasn't the driver, but we do want to update credit limit. Let's give it a test. 39,000 currently. There we go. Completely random credit limit setting. Excellent. And if we take a look here, we can actually see these AJAX requests going out, the values they're posting, and the responses from the server. It takes these and updates the item for us automatically. All right, another specification here. The application should set the credit limit's color according to the amount. And then there's some rules here for what color it should be. And notice that the rules are using greater than, less than, equal to, that kind of stuff. So the when the credit limit changes. Simple enough. And the true, well, we're just going to change the color. Let's take a look. So here's our credit limit. So if this changes, we want a different color applied to it accordingly. How can we do that? The credit limit is the driver, so we'll create a dynamic action. And I almost could use standard because the event is changed. It's that the action is not hide or show, enable or disable, so I have to go with advanced. But the default action will be fine. So in this case, credit limit is changed, and the change event is good. Now, a number of different ways I could do this. Thinking back to the condition part, I could say if the credit limit changes and then use this condition to say, it's equal to or greater than a certain value. The problem is I'll have multiple true actions that I'll have to maintain. Wouldn't it be nice if I could sort of consolidate all of that into one block of JavaScript? Well, we can't, so I'm going to leave that condition unselected. Come over here, go down to execute the JavaScript code, and we can just put our code in. But we have another problem. What am I trying to update? Essentially the credit limit's color, right? But what is the credit limit's color? How do I refer back to credit limit? Well, I could use another jQuery selector in my code, but the problem would be I'd have to maintain that as well. And the Apex team has actually thought about that. So if you click on code, you'll get a behind-the-scenes look at some of what they've done to overcome some of these. We have this .triggering element available to us in the code we write here. This .triggering element. Okay, so the triggering element was in fact credit limit. So I have access to credit limit by referring to this particular object. Sounds easy enough. Of course, here's the code. So I've declared a variable here. This is credit limit, and I'm setting it equal to the triggering element's value. And then I use credit limit in a conditional block here to decide what color I want to make the text. And again, I refer back to the triggering element when I do that. So if the credit limit is less than 5,000, it's green. If it's greater than 20,000, it's red. If it's somewhere in between, it's orange. Okay, let's bring that in. In this particular case, we're doing everything manually, so we don't need to select the affected element. We'll run the page, and we can see right off the bat that it's working. It's somewhere in between 5 and 20,000, so it's orange. We change this to 4,000, it's green. If we change it to 21,000, it's red. So when we combine the knowledge of CSS, JavaScript, and the like technologies, there's really no limits to what we can do. Dynamic actions just make it a lot easier and far more declarative than it's been in the past. For those of you who are looking to go forward with this, a couple of next steps for you. First of all, when all else fails, start with the documentation. So there's a link here you can use to get to the Apex documentation. A couple of clicks later will get you to the part on dynamic actions. Just go to the Application Builder User's Guide, Advanced Programming Techniques, and then Implementing Dynamic Actions. If you've not yet been to w3schools.com, I highly recommend you take a look. It's a great reference, and they have lots of tutorials for all of the technologies we talked about today and a whole lot more we didn't. I also recommend you check out Anthony Rayner's demo app. He's the developer and the Apex team that's responsible for most of what we see in Dynamic Actions, and his app demos a lot of their various features. So make sure you check that out. And that's it. Before I take questions, I actually want to let you guys know about a couple of things we have coming up. First of all, we have some Apex training classes starting soon. The intro class is starting January the 24th, and we have an advanced class starting the following week on the 31st. Of course, we offer a wide variety of Apex services, everything from full-time consulting to plugin development. And in fact, today we've released a new plugin page on our website. I wanted to show that to you guys. Really easy to get to. If you go to skillbuilders.com/Apex plugins, you'll land here. You can read about the services we offer, but also, more importantly, perhaps you can download our plugins. We've made 4 plugins thus far, some of which are really, really popular. And you can get all these for free. They require registration, but it's a small price to pay for some really great functionality here.